Thank you, Gavin. Let me add to the welcome that's already been extended this evening. We certainly do appreciate you being here. What a wonderful crowd. I mean, we have, if you're visiting with us, you don't know this, but we have a crowd of folks gone this evening and afternoon over to the Bible Bowl over in Walker County, and they're participating in that. So with that crowd gone and with this crowd here, we'd have another tremendous crowd. And we had just a wonderful, wonderful crowd this morning. Appreciate you being here. I don't know. Things just really seem to be going extremely well. And knock on wood. Because my daddy always said, and I'm as an elder, and I believe he is absolutely true, Satan is not going to let it go smooth in the church for long. He's going to do everything in his ability and power to tear it up. But while we're on the way up, and while we're praising God, and while we are doing everything we can to glorify Him, let's just keep putting the pedal to the metal and just striving to accomplish as much good as we can. I know there are Bible studies going on. There are people praying for others. We certainly hate, and we were sitting at lunch today, and we were close to Malcolm and Julie Johnson, and she said, "Did you see this?" and handed me her phone, and it was talking about the shooting just south of Nashville. And that just that's upsetting, to say the least. I'm thankful and grateful that we have men who are participating in the program. That we just got some great folks here, and appreciate each and every one of them. I looked at Gavin when Gary was saying all that we can't talk to him or whatever. We're going to have to get a pen that says, "You can't talk to me." Put it on their lapel, and that way we'll know who they are. But no, we appreciate everything they're doing and all the seriousness of it. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. We're covering the Bible Bowl material for the young people, so we're looking and studying in 1 and 2 Corinthians this year. We're going to be taking chapter 8 tonight. There's only 13 verses, so it's not really going to take us all that long. Let me back up just a step or two. You know, this started a different section back in 6 and verse 12 and goes through chapter 10, goes down to about verse 23, and it's matters of expediency, matters which are not matters of faith, and the question is, how do we deal with them? Tonight is no exception. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, you're going to deal with meat that was offered to idols. Now, to understand the importance of this, you've got to put yourself back in the first century. You've got to put yourself in the city of Corinth. You've got to be a Christian that's coming out of paganism. You've got to be a Christian that was reared by pagan, heathen parents that were doing the best of their ability. This was the way they worship. And then to be taught the truth, and I understand, I know Matthew 28, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. I understand that. I understand that all authority is given to men in heaven and earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe. We get that teach and baptize part, but that second aspect or that second phase of teaching, a lot of times just kind of goes right over our head. So in other words, if you've been blessed that you were reared in the church, then you've been knowing the truth all your life. That's all you're accustomed to. If somebody drug a piano in here tonight and said, "Okay, Gavin, you lead your first song and I'm going to play along with you," you'd be saying, "Whoa, wait, time out. Stop. That's not right." It would really feel strange, wouldn't it? Well, you're dealing with people that's dealing with those issues. Now, they're wrong. The way they're looking at the meat that's offering to idols is not a true concept. But if you have ever dealt with people, here's something you don't ever need to forget. Their perception is their perception. Well, that's just not right. I didn't say it was right. I didn't say it was wrong. I just said until they learn better, their perception is their perception. And we need to work with that. Dealing with new babes, 1 Peter 2 and verse 2, as newborn babes, you don't take Miss Kinley there and just throw her out there and throw a chicken leg at her and say, go ahead and eat. She might try to gnaw on it. I don't know. She looks pretty content where she is right now. It takes a process of growth. It takes a process of maturing. It takes a process of building up to get to the point where they can start to process these things on their own. The same thing is true in Christianity. Now, here's something we've done terribly bad in the church for years and years and years. Somebody's baptized, and maybe they came out of a denomination where when they sang at the end of the song, they might applaud. And they do that, and we're like, oh, I can't believe that. That's the worst thing in the world. How dare they do that? We need to just stomp the life out of them. No, I'm sorry. And I told you this morning, I was ignorant. I was a young, ignorant preacher. And that might have been my concept years and years ago. But we don't need to stomp the life out of them. We need to nurture them, train them. The very word we used this morning in regards to a physical child, that nurturing is an education and a discipline. So you bring them up. With all that said in the background, you come to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. This is not a matter of faith. This is a matter of expediency. Now, I've got 3 different little points. First of all, when you start in verse 1 and going through about verse 6, you're going to see that knowledge is a necessary thing. Notice in verse 1, now concerning things offered to idols, we know that all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. We have to have knowledge. The Bible even tells us, 2 Timothy 2 and verse 15, study to show thyself approved. 1 Peter 3 and verse 15, sanctify the Lord and guard your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you the reason of hope is in you with meekness and fear. It involves study. It involves knowledge. We could go to 1 Peter or 2 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Add to your faith virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, godliness, brotherly kindness. For if these things be in you abound, they make you that you shall neither be barren nor unfruitful. We got to have knowledge. You got to have knowledge. But let me show you a danger that's involved in knowledge. Poor old Gary, and I'll pick on Gary. I pick on Gary. He knows it because I love him. I pick on Gary because he don't get mad at me. That's why I pick on Gary. Let's say that I've just converted Gary, and bless his heart, he's come out of a Pentecostal movement, and they did a lot of different things that were contrary to the teaching, and he does something, and I feel like since he's my child in the faith, as Paul said about Timothy, that I just rake him over the coals because of that. Knowledge puffs up. Just because you're standing here with an understanding doesn't mean that with a heavy hand we answer that question. That's not the way to handle that situation. The way to handle that situation is put a loving arm around him and say, brother, I love you. You know what, Gary, I even love your enthusiasm. You're lifting up what you think are holy hands or whatever. We might need to study that passage a little further. And let's see what the Bible has to say about it. Why can't he keep his enthusiasm? Doesn't John 4 and verse 24 still say God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him how? In spirit. That's with enthusiasm. That's with love. That's with everything you got in your heart and your soul and your mind. Let's put it out there. That's the way we're supposed to worship God. in spirit and in truth. Now let's teach them the truth. Let's teach them the truth. Love edifies. Does not say that love condones wrongdoing. Doesn't say that. It says love edifies. Love encourages, it edifies, it builds up, is what the word edify means. So if instead of looking at these people and saying, how ignorant can they be to think that word might mean that? Don and Gary and I don't know if somebody else was standing here at the front a while ago. We're on 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're hammering that verse again. We're looking at that word for a better understanding. And I told Gary, he said, come on, we got to go, we got to start. And I said, man, you know how to break up a good Bible study. We're studying. Why? For edification. Why? Because we love each other. Why are we doing these things? And that's a good question. Why are you doing these things? Why concern yourself about doing it correctly? Is it important that we do it correctly? That's a question that we need to answer. And sure it is. Sure it is. Verse 2. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. He's talking about a sense of pride is what he's doing. An arrogance about it. There is never a sense with knowledge should there be arrogance. It's not that. If there is, then we're approaching it altogether improperly. Verse 3, but if anyone loves God, this one is known by him. What is it that makes us stand out? Our knowledge or our love? Well, to answer that, it's the love aspect that magnifies us. John 13, 34 and 35. A new commandment I give unto you, that what? That you love one another. Verse 35 says, by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if you have knowledge and stomp somebody to death because they've said something improperly. No. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one toward another. I'm not standing up here this evening and saying, let's compromise. You know me better than that. But there's a right way to do this. And the right way that we do these things is with love. I'll pick on Brother Ray. I've known Brother Ray Skelton for a long time. He's known me probably all my life. I hadn't probably known him because I was probably too small when I met him to remember him all my life. But most all my life I've known Ray. I don't know. Now, it's a good thing Tim's not up here in speaking part because he might correct me. But I don't know that I've ever seen Ray mad. But one thing I admire about Ray is he'll sit there and listen to you froth and foam at the mouth and just run in all directions and all that kind of stuff. And he's sitting there just as quiet as a little old church mouse. And then when he gets a chance to speak, you think, wished I'd have said that way. I wished that I would have handled that situation in that way. And to me, that's what he's talking about here in verse 3. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him. So it's not a matter of knowledge and arrogance. It is a matter of knowledge and love is going to show us how we're supposed to use that knowledge. Then he starts in verse 4. I started to break this chapter up this way. I started to just say 1, 2, and 3 is the application of knowledge. Then you need to circle in verse 4, therefore, and then if you skip on down to verse 7, circle however. And if you circle those three things right there, it makes a wonderful outline of this chapter. Therefore, okay, if I know how to properly handle knowledge, therefore what? Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and there is no other God but one. What do I know? I know that meat offered to idols is nothing. It's steak. That's all it is. You know, my understanding of this, the meats that were offered to idols, and you could even take this back into the Old Testament and notice how, in regards to a burnt offering, how that there was only part that was put on the offering and burnt. Part was given to the priesthood for their living, was it not? And for their use. Well, what about, let's say I'm the priest at that time, and I'm the priest here in Adamsville, and everybody's coming every day and offering burnt offerings unto God. Let's say I've got 25,000 pieces of steak. I like steak, but I can't eat that much. So what am I going to do with it? I'm going to sell it to Ashley, who runs the corner market down here, and he's going to sell it at the market. And this is where we're getting to this meat right here. Okay? The statement is simply this. The meat is nothing other than meat. That's common knowledge. But now what are you going to do with that knowledge? Well, I understand that this is a false God. There is no God but God. Then he says in verse 5, and even if there are so-called gods, notice gods there, small letters, false gods, pseudo-gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, of whom all things, we for him, and the one Lord Christ, through whom all things and through whom we live. We know for a fact that there's only one God. And he is the creator, and he is the Father, and he's going to give the Son, and the Holy Spirit is going to play. We know that. That's the knowledge we have. But yet, you and I have been brought up in the church. That's what we've been taught all our life. We're not accustomed to dealing with this meat. Then here's the other situation. And he says, however, there is not in everyone that knowledge. For some, with conscience of the idol, until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. Okay. You and I both know that the meat is nothing in the world but meat. And the idol is nothing. And we can go back in the Old Testament and talk about the works of rocks and the works of iron and the works of wood and, challenge the stump to move and it's not going to move. Challenge the rock to jump. The rock's not going to jump. It's just a rock. That's all it ever is. That's our knowledge. But yet here's these other folks that are coming out of idolatry. And these meats that are now in their possession, I'm saying, well, it's okay to go down the corner market and buy that meat from Ashley that I sold to Ashley as a priest because it's excess meat and I can't use it all. And now it's his privilege to sell that. David comes along. David and Gary are both coming out of idolatrous worship. And they're saying, yeah, but that meat was worship. It's going to be worship if I eat that meat. Now you have the knowledge, and the knowledge is that's wrong. Okay, now we can stomp the life out of David and Gary. No, I don't believe that's the answer to this question. He says in verse 8, but food does not commend us to God, for neither if we eat are we better, nor if we do not eat are we worse. So now Paul is going to try to reason with them to help them understand this situation. Are you any better off by eating that meat? Are you any worse off? Physically speaking, no. You're not. But beware, lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. Now we're going to take into consideration. Now, you as a stronger brother, and I almost laugh at this. I wished I had a long time to talk about this tonight. I know I don't. But I almost laugh because I've heard folks say before, why, I'm the stronger brother in this situation, and you need to be preaching and giving us some meat to eat instead of worrying about all those old folks out here that are weak, and why do you always preach on hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized? And anytime I hear somebody express that attitude, I always scratch my head. Well, if you're such a strong brother, then why is your attitude not the attitude that's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 8? Which is you're concerned about the weak brother. And we'll get to the last verse sums up the attitude. The attitude that you and I should possess. If anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when you thus sin against your brother, underline that. You sin against your brother and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Now here's the knowledge. Gary, there's nothing wrong with me eating that meat. But here's poor old Gary, he's coming out of that, and he's looking at that meat entirely differently. And he's saying, well, I just can't get it out of my mind. You know, last week I was offering that meat to the idol, and now you're telling me it's okay to eat. I'll eat it, but I tell you what, it sure is bitter. But you know what? The more I eat it, the better I like it. And you know what? If it's okay to eat it, well, then maybe it's okay to offer it to that idol. And no, you look back around, they're right back in idolatrous worship. And here I am, that strong brother again, and I'd say, well, I just don't understand why they left the church and went back into... I understand why. Because as a stronger brother, I didn't take in consideration their feelings. I'm as much to blame. Those were bitter words, weren't they? I'm as much to blame in relationship to this as the person that goes back. You know, I hate for there to be elephants in rooms. You know, we're speaking about meat's awful to... when's the last time you've seen anybody with an idol in the state of Alabama? When's the last time you've known anybody to offer a lamb unto an idol or anything of that nature? Well, let's put it into our lives that affect us. And what I'm about to say, I say because I love each and every one of you. But let's talk about a conservative movement versus what is known as a liberal movement in the body of Christ. I was listening to Brother Camp on this, and he was talking about some of our brethren who want to simply use one cup in relationship to the Lord's Supper. And he gave an illustration when he first started preaching. He said where they were two cuppers. You know, a cup for this side and a cup for that side. And he said, now the multiplicity of cups, that's not the issue. Because the knowledge is it's okay. And why should I stand up here and condemn somebody? And I don't think I ever have, by the way. If you want to be a one-cupper, I don't have a problem with that. If I ever visit at your place, I just want to be the first one that drinks. That's my only request. But here's where the problem comes. The knowledge is that it's not talking about a cup or 2 cups. And I always think that's strange because one cuppers usually find a way to somehow, 2 cups are okay, but 400 are not. Now, how does that make sense? Well, like I said, I'm not arguing this issue. I'm not arguing this issue. But here should be my attitude toward my brethren who feel that way. As long as you want to hold that as your opinion, and there are 40 people or 4,000 that want to meet with you and that's the way they feel, that's wonderful. But when I draw the line to say, because you don't use 1 cup, you're lost, that's when you're making a law where God has not made a law. That's what makes that wrong. That's what makes that wrong. Brother Camp said that he had a friend who preached here in somewhere around Birmingham that was of the anti-persuasion. And they discussed this matter. And he said, you know, I respect your congregation. He said, you can invite me to preach. And he said, I will never get up and cross this issue and make it a point of contention. And he said, and where I preach, our elders would invite you as long as you didn't get up and make it a point of contention to try to split the brotherhood. I think that's the way we ought to be. Why should we be this way? Verse 13, here it is. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat lest I make my brother stumble. Now, are there issues in relationship to liberty that might cause someone to stumble? And if so, then we ought to refrain from those things. And that ought to be our attitude. I love you and I want you to go to heaven. I start every study that I start with someone. The first thing I always say is, I'm interested in one thing alone, truth. I want to go to heaven. Do you want to go to heaven? Then we ought to be able to sit down and find the truth that's contained in God's inspired word. Well, we'll continue next week as we continue to look at 1 Corinthians. Thank you so much for studying with us this evening. Maybe there are some here this evening that need to come back to their first love. Maybe you're out of service to God. I beg you, please, 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 please consider what you need to do, where your life needs to be. It's not for me, but it is for God. It is for God. Not only that, there may be those that are here that have never been obedient to the gospel of Jesus Christ through their faith, through repenting of their sins, confessing Christ, and being buried with Him in baptism. Now, those aren't matters of expediency. Those are matters of faith. Can't change those. If you want to please God, if you want to come to God, if you want to be a child of God, here's what you need to do. We encourage you to do so. If you need to respond, won't you come as together we stand and sing.